So for all the folks that are in here now, this is our staff panel, and it's going to be amazing as well. So I hope that y'all are able to catch all the gems that will be dropped in here. We have Hania Bashir, who's from Georgetown University. She'll be the moderator, so she will kick it off and allow our panelists to do what they got to do. Hey, Ra, and it's about to be dope, so let's get it.
Yes, thank you, Erica. I am super excited to be here to be moderating this panel. So glad technology has been working well for us in this platform. So we're just going to get into it since we run a little bit behind schedule, and just highlight some really key points that I heard in the last session, from peer mentorship to self-preservation to only talking about Black things and Black spaces. And I feel like that resonated with me as a Black staff member at a predominantly white institution. And so interesting for us to make those connections and see the difference between like what Black faculty and what Black staff members have been facing, and also the student experience as well is very real. So I am Hania Bashir. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm from New York originally. I am a community director in residential living at Georgetown University. My PWI experience, undergrad at Wells College, and I studied theater and dance and childhood education, and then graduate school, University at Buffalo, higher education, student affairs. And I'm gonna kick it to Danielle to start us off because her birthday was recently. Happy birthday.
Yes, thank you for the shout out.
Celebrate. The July 23rd. I'm hip. I did my research.
Leo.
But yeah, I'm gonna kick it off, and then we're gonna go who's next so we can keep it going. So pick somebody after you to also introduce themselves.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that introduction. Danielle Brown, pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm from New Jersey, but now residing in Connecticut, where I'm an assistant women's basketball coach at Yale University. I've been here for 2 years now. Short and sweet, I'll just like to say I want to thank Erica for creating this space, this important space, and inviting me to share from my own experience. And I'm going to kick it to Monique.
Hello, everyone. My name is Monique Gore. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm the Director of Programming and Outreach at Gettysburg College. And I'm also an alum of the institution. I left and I came back. So I'll have to acknowledge the level of privilege that I'm speaking from in that regards as we get into the topics. And I'll hand it off to Alan.
Hello, Alan Linton, he, him, his. I am the Director of Diversity and Inclusion for the Associated Colleges of the Midwest. It's a collective of 14 small liberal arts colleges. I'm also a PhD candidate at the University of Chicago, so a lot of experience with PWI institutions, and I'm just excited to be a part of this discussion. And I will kick it to Ranisha.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ranisha. I use she, her pronouns. I am a community director at Wake Forest University, a small liberal arts private school in North Carolina. And I think that was all that was asked of us.
Introducing yourselves. So we'll start off with the first question. What has led you to your position in higher education, and what is keeping you here? And Alan, why don't you start us off this time?
My pleasure. For me, I've only been in this position for a little bit of a year, and it was very new. And the thing that drew me to it was kind of looking around and seeing the conversations and the action that was taking place before, and being pretty unsatisfied with it. It's kind of the story of America, story of education in this country, that people were experiencing problems, but there was no real concrete, solid solutions. And so this opportunity emerged for me, and I wanted to bring something to the table to be talking about in different spaces, either with colleagues or friends or with peers. But I think being actually someone that was a staff member that had not a lot of power within the institution, but some degree of an advocate, a voice, someone that could propose different ideas as a way to try to get around some of the common institutional and structural challenges for Black students at PWIs. I wanted to be a part more actively of those solutions. And so that's what slowly, but then very quickly, once I started, drew me here. And it's frankly what keeps me here today.
Thank you for sharing that change agent component, and supporting Black students at PWI is something that's important to all of us. I'm glad we're here. Who's next? Who would like to go?
I'll go. I was very much that like active student leader. If you name a position, whether it was RA, president of the BSU, involved in the Women's Center, I was very much that student leader. And I enjoyed college a lot. And one advisor said, "Have you ever thought about doing this as a career?" And I was like, "That's the thing." Because up until that point, I was still trying to figure out how I ended up at a 4-year institution in the middle of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, as a Black woman. So I was like, sure, why not? You know, I could try anything. And while I was looking for residence life jobs, I was offered a student activities job in my search. And so I kind of stumbled into student activities, programming, leadership development. And I've ended up in multicultural affairs due to very similar to what Alan said, just that overall, like being a part of the change that you want to see and using my role as an alum to leverage that. And so that's how I ended up in the multicultural field.
I'll go next. My profession is largely revolved around relationships. Some will say it's not what you know, but who you know. And that's definitely to some degree something that applies to becoming a Division I college basketball coach. So I was able to build a relationship with my head coach and make an impression while working a few women's basketball camps at Yale while I was working coaching at the high school level. Long story short, I was offered the job, but what keeps me here is it's number one been a goal of mine, and to be able to do it at a place that can offer and value not just high level academics or athletics, but both is something that drew me in. And number two, I remember just thinking about the opportunity, and really when I came for my interview and being in the space of Yale and looking at the athletic department, in which at the time I received the job, I was one of just 2 Black women in athletics. And now there are 3 of us, so progress there. and so that was, you know, like Monique and Alan just said, I felt a strong pull towards a purpose in being in this space and showing up for our Black student athletes.
Yes, thank you, Ranisha.
So I come from what we'll consider a non-traditional background as far as my undergraduate degree. So I got my undergraduate degree in forensic chemistry. So I just knew for sure I will be doing analyzing evidence and stuff like that, which it shows up very much today in my role and in life. Like I'm extremely critical of everything. I like find the gaps in everything, and I, you know, and sometimes, but as far as higher ed and transitioning into it, the chemistry was difficult, and I was like finding my outlets at that PWI. I was struggling. I was like, let me join the BSU. I was like, oh, okay, what is this D9 thing? Let me try that too. And you know, I found a niche in what I found to be, you know, lifting as I climb, and I found that still to be the thing that I'm interested in today. You know, I don't always want to, you know, climb up to the top and pull people up when I get up there. I'm much more of a community grassroots type of person who's always, you know, leaning down, you know, as I'm climbing up, because I'm like, we're doing this together. Very much collectivism or collectivist oriented. And so that's pretty much what led me to higher ed. I knew my experiences being Black and being queer. At the time, I didn't know about that identity, but still, like, queerness is pretty fluid in how it showed up. So when I was an undergrad, very much was like, ooh, I don't want to be the person responsible for imprisoning Black folks because evidence is flawed. And then I got into higher ed and I was like, oh, okay, there's a lot of transferability here. So I pretty much, I found myself very much sticking to a core purpose that I find bleeding in and out of higher ed, and that's developing Black folks and bringing them up with us and figuring out how we can create wealth, because I think that's extremely important. So a lot of my conversation extends within the lens of higher education, but a lot more broadly around Black people's wealth and our ability to pass it down through generations.
Thank you so much for these intros for the first question. Y'all talked a lot about like the sense of community that's important, also that there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, and that's what really keeps us here, to keep supporting these students in these spaces. I would like to talk a little bit next about what is your institution help support Black students outside the classroom, given the virtual barriers combined with racism, as it's very prevalent in what's going on. And I mean, it's loaded, it's a lot, because we are dealing with a couple different pandemics at the same time. But what's going on a little bit at your institution? Whoever feels most passionate to go first can start.
So my institution is swinging the pendulum this one way, where we're going all in, we're bringing all the students back, and making adjustments as necessary to accommodate them. And then students that are choosing to stay virtual, providing them with resources to do so. What we saw in the spring, though, was this influx of where there was this gap in communication about access. So we send all of these students home, and do they have internet? Do they have the computers necessary? And so we got called to the carpet in that respect of really stepping back and saying, oh, we as an institution want to be aware of issues of access. But when the rubber hit the road, we just weren't prepared for it. And then we were playing catch up. So I think this summer has given us institutionally the opportunity to allow everyone to make their own experience for the fall and whatever that looks like, and then offer the necessary resources to support that. So if that means you aren't coming back from the West Coast, you're going to stay home, do you have a hotspot that you need? Do you need a laptop? The one area that we have not done well in is being accommodating, which I don't think faculty realized was going to be such a big issue. But if they were going to hold their classes in real time virtually on the East Coast, that translates to something completely different for a kid that's sitting in, Compton or East LA or Oakland. So we had a lot of advocating to do for students around that area, and issue of access. Just something as simple as time. 3 hours is a huge time difference when you have an 8 o'clock class. So that's the one area where we're still trying to make sure that faculty understand, in addition to all these other intersecting things that may come into play. If I'm queer and my family isn't supportive and I'm trying to be in a virtual environment, if we just don't have access, so, paying for internet isn't a thing. So finding out where those gaps are as we help students kind of create their own experience.
To build off that, what Monique said was really crucial about the resources and taking the time to reevaluate things that are, it's not just shifting the norms to virtual, but it's thinking about, what kind of capacities and standards are you having in the classrooms? Are you asking people to put their cameras on, and why that may not be the best option? Are you thinking about class time? How are folks going to be able to register in an equitable way if their internet access is not the same? So from our standpoint, working at 14 different institutions, it's 14 different systems, and everyone has an opinion on what's best. And so we've been trying to be in a space where we want to pull back and say, what are the resources that are necessary, frankly, that are necessary when you're not dealing with systemic racism and a global pandemic in either waves 1 or 2, that Black students need to succeed. And so before you're asking them to write this paper, to read this book, to do this presentation, are you ensuring that they have housing? Are you ensuring that they have food? Are they in a safe environment? Because if you're not thinking about the wellness of the student, then it doesn't matter, what's going to happen in a class, because they're thinking about how they're going to eat, how they're going to pay bills, and things of that nature. So that's one piece. The other piece is, at least from my position, is trying to support students so that they don't feel like they need to be a student and the leading advocate from afar on their campus. And so what can we do? What can I do in my position, and what can our staff do? Sometimes it's, going with the flow. Other times it's pulling people along to say, here are some policies and things that need to change in this moment that we're suddenly paying attention to, something that isn't fundamentally new. And the student shouldn't have to carry the burden of going to occupy, if they're doing a hybrid system, the president's office, or have to blow up the president's email, because they need people to pay attention, as well as I need to be a student, as well as I need to be an athlete. And so how we can help, take a little bit of that burden off of the students is also crucial to success.
Thank you for those points. Wow, I'm over here snapping my fingers, sipping tea, because we know what those conversations look like as administrators sometimes, while we're pushing for advocacy and trying to have these very real conversations about class, social economic status, and race, all these different levels of social identities, and also sexual orientation and what's going on at home. Like, these are very real things, and now all of those things have been uprooted, and they have to now create their own systems in their home life when they got so used to campus life. So very good point. Anyone else want to jump in on that question?
Yeah, I would like to add a couple things, because I have a very much a Pan-Africanist approach to life and systems as they exist. And a lot of folks might regard it as negativity. I find it to be realism. I'm a realist. I take things for what I see them as, and I move forward. But this shows up very much in day-to-day operations, when the reality is that folks are facing a particular set of intersectional failures, and the institution is hopeful that it'll get better without the action. So my Pan-Africanist approach is, without any action, what are we doing? My institution, for example, I can't even tell you how many commissions we have. How many, small intergroup within a group, subcommittees that are going on. And it's like, the main one's like, okay, let us look at slavery and racism. But when you think about capitalism and how it shows up at the private institution, you can't disregard that when you're trying to take a deep dive into the institution's founding and its history. So for our institution and Black students, a lot of the students tend to be, even the Black students tend to be middle class. And so we disregard even folks, well, a lot of folks are considering the Black folks who are not athletes to be middle class, and the folks who are athletes to be lower class. And for those folks who are Black and on an academic scholarship or something like that, they are completely disregarded. And the institution assumes that they're good financially because they're at this institution where everybody's paying $70,000+ a year to go to. So conversations regarding what it looks like to learn from a distance is not even a conversation, because it's underneath the assumption that everybody has access to these things, because the broad majority of students fall underneath that middle to upper class, and it completely disregards the folks who are middle class and struggling, or even people don't understand class, and it's very obvious in how it's situated at the institution. I mean, this is my first time working at a private institution. I've never went to a private school, so imagine the reality checks. I come from a low income. I grew up in the hood. I'm like, whoa, this is different for me. And having those conversations with students who, even further, having those conversations with from a class perspective, middle class and upper class folks, regardless of race, has been very difficult as it pertains to being at the institution. So I think that we have to address that as the core of a lot of issues, because once you connect that with race, it very much creates even more of an issue for folks as the pandemic exists, because we got these issues at home and we have these issues at school, and then our students, especially our Black students, don't feel comfortable in either space.
Yeah, That's definitely been a theme since the beginning of the day. We keep talking about how racism is so closely connected to capitalism, and it's very real. And a lot of people aren't ready to have these conversations. And so I'm also really interested to hear what it looks like from the athletics perspective at Yale. Danielle, if you want to talk a little bit about that,
Yeah,
what that transition.
I'll definitely share. You know, from the athletic perspective, it's different because a lot of our decision making in terms of everything that's happening is based off of academic decisions. So someone makes a decision academically, and now athletic now has to pivot or adjust based on it. Yale is going to be operating at 60% capacity within our dorms, residential colleges. So that means first years will be on campus in the fall, but not in the spring. And then sophomores will be on campus in the spring, but not the fall. So, you know, obviously we have players that are first years and sophomores having to navigate through that space has been interesting. As far as virtually, you know, our players, which we have 14 players, 3 of them are Black. We haven't had really any issues as far as um, virtual learning. What we have run into, though, and I think, Monique, you might have brought it up, was the difference, the timing of classes, and then as it pertains from students coming from all over the world. Yale is represented by 123 different countries. You have people from all different types of time zones. We have a player in our team that had a 9 a.m. East Coast time class. Well, she's in Colorado, so that's like 6 a.m. almost for her, you know? So learning how to accommodate not just the virtual community in terms of what's being in place with Zoom, but also how are we catering to our students that are coming from international backgrounds? How are we being able to make sure that they are being serviced in those areas if we are going to be in this remote learning for however long?
Absolutely. Yeah, that shift to going into 60% and then like maybe increasing to full, and what does that even look like is something else. But I would like to shift the conversation just a tad from inequities and talk about support. And what does that look like for you as a Black staff member to make sure that Black students feel seen and represented within all of the different identities at our institution? Because we understand that Black people and this Black experience is not a monolith. And so what have you all done as Black staff members to assist with that?
I'll go. I think the biggest question I ask myself is, are our young Black women being seen and heard? Are we centering their voices? How can I, as a Black woman in this space with them, help equip them to navigate this space as a PWI, but also being a Black woman in society? Because to keep it real, you know, the 14 women that I have daily contact with come from pretty privileged backgrounds, Black and white in a sense. And so their experience here and in these places educationally is going to be different in the workplace and what they're going to be doing. So we're still having conversations in terms of how you are able to navigate when you step outside of, in a sense, what could have been very comfortable and uncomfortable spaces for you. So some ways in which I've tried to do that is with visibility. You know, there's 3 Black women on our teams. Social media is a huge part of what we do in college athletics. So making sure they're represented in calendars and graphics, that their voices are amplified, not just when we're celebrating Black History Month, if we can keep it real, to make it a point to support Black-owned businesses for meals. So every meal is an American or Italian. To start having Black breaks, as I like to call it, which are just check-ins where I'm making sure you are all right in this space mentally, emotionally, and socially. Are you dealing with any biases? Are you dealing with microaggressions? And not just like in the space at Yale, but also on the team. So this is on and off the team. So having those Black breaks have been something that I feel has been a way in which we can have real talk and kind of let down our guard of being at a PWI and in this space of always having to show up.
Yes, thank you for that. Representation matters, we all know, and especially when it comes to resources and these dollars, send it to the Black businesses always.
Yes.
Anyone else want to touch on that? Maybe Monique, you want to go next?
Sure. To say that, if people break down their jobs in like percentages, I feel like, a good 60% of my job is offering support, but not just support, advocacy, because a lot of the places and spaces on our campus where our students aren't being heard or seen are in the classroom. So when we talk about, in the classroom, if a student is in a social class or economics class, and they're asked to speak on behalf of all Black people. Like, oh, you're from Harlem. Can you tell us about Harlem for Black people? And it's like, one, you made the assumption that this sister was exclusively Black, like she's Black and Latinx. So here we go, which again, that's going down the rabbit hole of intersectionality. But then having the student come to you and say, how do I process this? What do I do? Well, there's a system for that. But because as an administrator, I've been able to build relationship with faculty, and it may not be that faculty specifically, it may be the department head or one of their peers, where I can say, how would I approach this faculty member to let them know that what was done in the classroom was inappropriate? And I wish for them to clap flick, because now we are going to go to the provost. So a lot of times support isn't just, I'm here from you, like you're being seen. It's that level of advocacy, like I'm about to go out on the line and we're going to fight together. A lot of that, oftentimes too, is giving them the confidence, if they feel like they're being wrong or something biased has happened on campus, to make sure that they know what the processes are in order to submit that grievance, and giving them the confidence you can do this and see it through. Because the reality is 4 years at a predominantly white institution has done nothing but prepare you for what the real world is. When you walk into that boardroom, when you walk into graduate school, you're going to still be the 2% of Black women or Black men or Latinx or, persons of color that are queer, and you need to know how to move. And so part of the support that, I've always offered students over like the 14 years of being in higher ed is, let me help you figure out how to move in this so that you're confident. And when you have to deal with the ignorant boss or the microaggressions or Karen coming at you, you don't falter and you stand your ground so that you can still persist and be successful. But there's a bazillion other ways that I offer support, but I feel like that's the most important, because those are the skills that students need once they leave our campuses, period.
May I add on to that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I think you brought up a Monique or interesting point per se. I wanted to just like pick on that just for a little bit, the piece about how Black students being in a particular space prepares them for what's to come afterwards. And I agree with that. And I think it depends on which space they're in. When I think about, for example, student athletes, I think the way they see how campus is definitely is a lot different from a traditional Black student just going to class and potentially working 1 to 2 jobs on the side of that. So definitely still dealing with their own types of aggressions, but I think that the scope looks different. I wanted to talk more about the perspective that I take on things. I'm gonna just be honest, every student's not your favorite. But for me, I make it a point to acknowledge every Black student I see, no matter whether they have pissed me off or not, because I want them to know that I value them and that I see them and that they matter to me, regardless of the relationship that we have. I'll say hi, I'll check in. Like, that's super important, because how many people are presence on campus? And so as a Black student, I recall the feelings I had. I lean back to when I was a student. What did I need from the Black staff members that I came into contact with, or the Black faculty members who were in the chemistry department who literally didn't acknowledge me? And I'm like, hold on, I thought it was it's supposed to be something here. That's how I was raised. Where's the gap? But I also think I take the perspective of we need more visibility. I very much believe when it comes to hiring processes, when it comes to the white supremacy that's entrenched in hiring processes, that eliminates right there who is able to get access to these spaces. So for me, when I'm interviewing someone and when I'm teaching folks how they need to be interviewing candidates, I'm really trying to figure out how we can know ourselves well enough to unpack the. Now, I'm not trying to do a bias training. I'm trying to let you understand yourself and see how bias shows up. Because if you don't understand yourself, you cannot understand yourself in the work and how you are performing or how you are the main one that is acting as the main sphere of why folks are feeling a particular type of way. So when it came to hiring Black RAs, for example, I had one last year and I was like, whoa, we're going to change that. And so this year, you know, the numbers are still low, but I have 4 Black RAs now, and one of them's a trans male. So it's like, we about to get this representation. I have like 3 Latinx or maybe 4 Latinx folks on my squad. Like we out here. As far as like creating affinity spaces for the RAs, because oftentimes you'll have a Black RA who's the only person of color, not the only Black person, only person of color on their floor. And they are supposed to be the ones leading their floors and leading their communities, but they're being called N-words. So it's like, okay, you don't feel accepted at the institution. You don't feel accepted by the very department that says we're the most diverse set of folks you'll find on campus. Where do we find the middle ground? And oftentimes it ends up being somebody who does diversity work or somebody who's passionate about the work, somebody who fits, you know, the persona that's not getting paid for that work. You know, it's literally passion work so that they don't experience some of the things that we've experienced. So that's more so the perspective I take. I definitely take the time out of my days to go above and beyond. I try to go to all BSA events. I try to advise them when I can. They have my personal cell phone number with restrictions. And, you know, I just provide the space to let them know, like, you know, these power dynamics exist, but I want you to know I want to humanize you as much as possible because I see you. And I don't have to act like this big person who cannot be touched. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm literally a CD. I'm probably like 3 or 4 years older than you. I don't want to make it like, you know, extremely informal, but I also don't want them to think that every single place in life they have to perform. And I want them to take the armor off when they're around me. So that's what I'm out here doing.
Yes, thank you for that insight. Personally, I'm like yes to all these things because when we talk about advocacy and taking almost the burden off of our students, and one less thing they have to worry about is making sure that they are represented in these spaces. And that was like one of my first line of business. I got to Georgetown, I'm like, 1 Black male RA. Excuse me, I'm hiring an all Black team. What you mean? I want all the smoke. So it's like things like that. It's like when you think about advocacy, it's like hiring in your recruitment. It's talking about like, did I speak to this person that I just walked past? And like, you know, I am in this position of like authority or, you know, the person that gives direction, but also are they seeing you as a real person? And so I'm like, well, do you want to touch on any of the things that was mentioned so far?
I agree with everything has been said much better than I would. The only thing that maybe I'll add is one of the things I think about is it's a weird kind of thing, but how can I remove myself as the middle person between the student and the seat of power? And so I want to be able to create a situation where if the student wants to, not that they should feel like they have to, but if they want to, then it's on me to facilitate ways to get that student their full self, all of their identities in front of the people that need to hear and be reminded, kind of the opening of the question, like we know that Black people are not a monolith. And yet everywhere we exist, from the classroom examples, when I was an undergrad, I was the only Black person in my entire dorm. Like those types of tensions, how do I facilitate ways for those students to not have to feel like they need to go through me to get for advocacy to happen on their behalf, or for people to raise these kind of questions. But how can I say, hey, let's set this up, let's prep, and then you can make the case, and then I'm here to back you, right? It's not giving the voice, it's elevating the voices that they already have about their experiences. And I think the other piece that really struck me when I was listening to everyone share their experiences and insights and knowledge was, oftentimes we are prepared and are preparing Black students to be resilient. And that is an essential skill. But I think sometimes we put resilience in opposition to wellness. You have to be strong. You have to have that armor on all the time. You need to be able to endure. Instead of thinking resilience should be a part of wellness, not this thing that's separated from, and we need to build that up, frankly, from kindergarten, elementary school on up. And I really want to make sure that in terms of support, we package these things together, that we want them to endure and be resilient, but also know that there are other parts that they need to take care of, and we as staff people need to take care of as we're fighting these fights in these places that beat you down all the time. Those are, I guess, the critical points that I wanted to throw in.
If I can just add something real quick, I'm glad you brought that up, because it's especially in this crisis that we're in terms of what has happened with George Floyd. Immediately, it became a spotlight on athletics in terms of where you stand, who's putting out statements, what are head coaches saying. There's Zoom call after Zoom call in terms of bringing teams together and trying or not trying to address things. And I know for us, it has been heavy. It's been a lot of attention, and it's been a lot of stress on our Black athletes to be the voice, to be the all things encompassing Black. And so you have to answer these questions, you have to show up. And so I had to have a conversation, if I can be honest, with our leadership to say, we need to stop putting all of this on our Black athletes. So if they feel as though it is good for their mental well-being to not show up for this Zoom call, then that needs to be okay. And that is something that we need to really be talking about, is how we protect our Black students, our Black athletes in these times in which everybody wants to talk about it. But are we talking about it inclusively, or are we just throwing it on the Black students and athletes?
Yeah, thank you.
And I want to add to that. And it's not even just in these times, it's when they need a Black voice. So it's like, oh, the president is pulling together a committee, somebody is pulling together a committee. And I'll sit and talk to a student and say, do you want to take advantages of this opportunity, or do you want to be taken advantage of? And we walk through that, because the reality is that for the last 5 or 6 years since the University of Missouri had their whole blow up, and we've entered into this phase of student activism, Black students and Latinx students and dreamers have been called to the table to speak on behalf of whatever the cause is. And they've been talking for the last 5 years. So if we don't have enough data bites, if we don't have enough sayings, sit-ins, stand-ins to act now, then we never will. And at this point, we don't need we need to get into action. When I say we, I mean institutions, not students, because this ain't the first summer. This is, 2015, we had Freddie Gray, we had Ferguson. I mean, now we got a whole list of hashtags. And there doesn't need to be another hashtag for institutions to start all of these committees that they've, had, and working groups and climate studies and all of the consultants that have come in to say, hey, this is what you need to do. You need to put all that stuff into action now. Sorry, it's just one of those buttons.
But y'all transition seamlessly into the next question that wants to be highlighted around, like, what do you feel that institutions should do to reconstruct given the current climate? And so I feel like we're definitely starting to talk a little bit about that. So if we can proceed with that, that would be great.
I think there are two things that I think institutions should have been doing. One is that higher ed institutions need to get better at educating themselves on things that are happening around them. Like it's, you know, if the premise is we're going to be charging big bucks so you can learn the things and we are sources of knowledge and that you go do with it, then the folks that are running these institutions have to then do that work. And again, to Monique's point, the fact is that none of this is new, right? And so the second piece is I've been asking, whether it be other directors, if it's vice presidents, if it's a provost, and frankly, the presidents. It's a fundamental question. What changed for you after the end of May 2020 compared to, you pick it, 5 years ago, 200 years ago? But what changed? Because the death hasn't changed, the racism hasn't changed, but now, you know, campuses that didn't want to touch hashtag Black Lives Matter, didn't want to touch or didn't want to get near something called anti-racism, are tripping over themselves to put out a statement, change a color here, everything's in black and white, we need to make a fancy video. I think those are the pieces that they need to deal with in the spirit of education, is what's different. And then how is this not going to be a moment? Because I guess for me, I can only speak for myself here, I feel like this is a window of time before something else happens that's going to take their eye off of this. And so forcing with that in different ways, it's supporting Black students, it's frankly supporting Black faculty and staff, but it's also forcing the institutions and the people within them to answer and deal with these questions and go beyond these statements to what are you going to tangibly do. And I'll say one more thing, because I'm going too long and I apologize, but one last thing that an institution can do is stop treating these moments like they're public relations things that they need to deal with. Institutions are reactive, right? There was an incident, there's a problem, we need a committee, we have a statement, and then we fade away, right? Because students graduate, or, you know, staff or time is put elsewhere. But institutions needs to get out of, this is not a PR crisis, right? Yep. This is a reality, and that the solutions need to be oriented towards changing the fundamental structures, not navigating through troubled waters until another incident happens or until we can rally around homecoming and everyone's good to go.
Wow. Thank you.
Yeah, and no follow-up for that. Was the question about the political climate? Yeah,
I
was like, hold on, what was the question?
In what ways do you feel that institutions should reconstruct given the current climate of racism in our country?
They just got to tear the whole thing down. Like tear the whole system down. Like the fundamentals of the institution, like regarding capitalism, religion. Like we have to go deep into this because we don't understand how interconnected some of these issues are. You know, I'm at an institution where it was founded on Christian principles, very much so, that exists to this day. Even if they say they lean more toward a liberal arts institution, that shows up in how people act. So being politically correct all the time, women not acting in a particular way on campus, having that Southern attitude. I'm from Ohio, so I came down, I was like, hold on. It's a lot of manners down here. What's going on? But generally speaking, to Alan's point, like everything is treated like a PR crisis because it's rooted in capitalism. How will this impact our money? Because we need to keep our checks looking the same. And not our meaning the folks at the bottom on the ground, our meaning the folks at the top who are getting millions of dollars to operate the institution, while the folks are getting nothing at the bottom. So when we think about how the landscape exists overall, I'm just like, I'm not a hopeful person, which is why I have businesses outside of higher education, because while I think it's a great tool for upward mobility, I see it also being extremely detrimental for some folks. And so it's kind of weird when we're telling folks to come through higher ed because that's your outlet out, and they end up, getting out, but struggling all the way through and never healing from that experience that they had in higher education. So they're carrying all of this trauma that they had growing up. Then the institution drops on them. And now I'm supposed to figure out what it looks like in the real world. So I'm just like, not the real world, because people been going through real things, but the post higher ed world. So I really feel like it's time where we just stop acting like it doesn't exist. Like, we will never name that an office is entrenched in white supremacy. Like, we cannot say racism without saying nobody will say I'm racist. Nobody will accept that and say, and even if you're not saying that you're racist, saying that you perform in a system that operates through racist conceptions and theories. And I find this like very difficult myself, being very dominant and being a Black woman. When I send an email out to the department saying, hey, our office is racist, and they're like, okay, you're right. I thank you so much for this. And it's like, hold on, sis. I took about 30 minutes to draft the words and spell check. I done went and found resources for y'all. Like, I'm not getting paid for this work. And sometimes, it's difficult because staff members, we sit in a weird place, like between faculty, between students, between our departments. And it's very hard to hold all of those different roles. It's extremely hard, especially when you think about our identities placed in that. But I'm gonna stop now. But I really think that, like, I don't know, because it just seems like, to Alan's point, it's a one in and a one out. It goes in one, out the other, and then we're recycling the same thing. Like, if white people and non-Black people of color, because I've expanded my lens, if white people and non-Black people of color continue to do what they're doing, I don't necessarily see a positive future for higher education. I continue to just see the problem reinvent itself in different ways.
I will just say, like you all are saying, it feels performative. And when is the action actually going to happen? Like, it's like, how many times are we going to keep having this dialogue, these trainings, these conversations? And it's like, we hear you. And I'm like, okay, well, what are the action steps that have been taken since our last conversation? Oh, there is none. Okay, so we're going to circle back to this. At what point do we actually circle back to you doing something and the impacts that has on the lives of the people that you're around, and also the exhaustion of the Black educators in these spaces that are continually to share their knowledge with you for free, 99.
Sorry.
No.
Sorry. No, because I feel so passionate about this. I feel so passionate about people not understanding their role. They do not, folks from privileged identities, all of us, we do not understand ourselves well enough to understand how we are performing in a system. So when we go to our white colleagues, it is literally not enough to say that the office is racist. We have to literally tell them, this is what's happening. And we need for them to understand and look at themselves and say, what am I doing? When you spell my name wrong, and it's in an email repeatedly, RANIE. This is just language overall. Y'all learn this. It ain't E before I. These are the things that we're having conversations about. When you've misgendered this student after we told you that they do not go by those pronouns anymore. What does that look like? And folks don't see themselves in the work, which is why we cannot begin to even have the conversation about how to reconstruct it. They don't even understand the problem at hand. So it's literally like, I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah. No, I'm like, anyone else want to jump in? Monique, Danielle?
Y'all just said, go ahead, Monique.
I don't even think it's a matter that they don't understand the problem, because some of them do. And they still double down on the level of ignorant things that they do. And I'm seeing that firsthand, where it's like, oh yeah, I get what I'm doing in this moment, in this search process is microaggression and being biased. I'm tenured, I'm white, I'm male, and on any other privilege that you want, I'm still going to do it. So in that retort, we can't even lean on, oh, they don't know. They know. I want to say more often than not, they know. So I think it's more of having a institution that says, no, we're not going to do that here. And there are some that are moving the needle. There aren't enough, and the needle isn't going far enough. But I think, having the inclusion action partners being a part of search committees and calling out, like, why are we looking for where this person lives or what institution they went to get their PhD? There, it's getting better, but like you said, the needle is not moving even half as much as it should be.
Yeah. I'll just add just really quick to that. I think that when we talk about athletes, especially the Black experience at a PWI, Black athletes are siloed even within the athletic realm. And so, we have an African American Cultural Center, AFM House, that does amazing work for the Black students, but Black athletes don't feel connected to that space, and we need to ask ourselves why. Why is there a disconnect between the Black athlete and the Black students? Why aren't they comfortable being in this space with them? And I know there's lots of things in terms of lack of, or, their schedules don't coincide, or lack of time, lack of knowledge of the resource. I spoke with a young lady that is on the track team, and she's one of very few Black athletes. And she was like, I don't even know who to ask where to get my hair braided around here. I'm like, wow. I'm like, girl, I got you. You can go right over here around the corner. My girl hook you up. Here's a number. But to not even have that sense of community is something that was just very, very upsetting to me. So where is this space for our athletes, a physical space in terms of, and where's the connection, whether that's before they even board on campus? How are we connecting the Black community at these PWIs to make sure that we're not just hitting one area, but we're not saying this is just one piece that belongs to this one Black person, there's one demographic. We are being able to reach all and finding a time in which all of this can be done. I think that's absolutely needed.
Yeah, that sense of community is super important. I recall, like, when I used to interview as a Black person, I'm like, my first question when I see a Black person on campus, I'm like, well, where's the nearest hair salon? Where's the nearest nail salon? Like, my basic essentials need to be taken care of in that regard, because you have to acknowledge that my hair may not look like everybody else's on this campus. And so it's like that regard of like basic needs need to be taken care of, as we're also talking about like academics in these spaces. So I want to be cognizant of time, and I want to make sure that we touch on the last question. What is one thing you learned as a Black staff member at a PWI that you feel has helped you on your journey? Just one out of the 15 million, just one. I'll say for me, start off, I'm like, maybe for me, like it was a sense of community and like finding my tribe and finding like those key people that I can talk to and be authentically 100% myself with has been very crucial to my experience.
I would say that I've learned to never lose sight. Like, don't ever lose sight of who you are. Don't lose sight of who you are and why you were called into this space. Your voice absolutely matters. Don't get boggled down with people trying to talk over you to try to diminish your ideas. Your ideas matter, your opinions matter, and your presence. Your presence, especially at PWIs, they all matter and will impact not only now, but more than what you know going into the future.
Quick. For me, it's asking questions. It's oftentimes been really helpful to figure out, like, I guess asking questions and never what's going on, even on just basic stuff. But for me, it's a way to raise different issues without, frankly, coming off as there's the Black combative guy in the meeting. There's the guy that's like just trying to upset all the good stuff. And it's also as a tactic, a way to figure out what do people value. Ask questions of hear how they're evaluating a program, or hear what are the things that are quote unquote important to them. Because once you get that information, you can take the work that you're doing and the goals that you have and package it in the way that's going to land in the language they speak and the values that they have. And it makes it harder for them. I'm not saying that it will work 100% of the time. It does not. But it will make it harder for them to talk around it because you're using their language back at them. And so I would say ask questions and don't assume.
For me, again, I'm gonna be honest. I'm like the one that's the step out of higher ed, so I'm that person. Okay, let's just be honest here. But for me, something that I've learned through all of this political acumen is that you got to understand your worth outside of higher education. When it comes to what you are passionate about and what you have interest in, they may vary. That does not mean that you have to stick in any particular role or any particular field strictly because that's the history of your work. Do not feel confined to the restrictions that higher ed may make Black folks feel at times, strictly because it's your work history. Understand yourself well enough to know what skill sets that you have that are transferable through any sphere that you want. And yeah, like Marchez, sorry, I hope I said your name right. Create your own lane and run with it. Something that's super important is like higher education is not going to create wealth for your family. So how do you make that work? You got to understand the code. You got to understand business. That's all I'm going to say. And that's it. If y'all interested in talking more about that after the call, let me know.
I think the one thing, I mean, there's obviously more than one thing that I've learned that's helped me on my journey is doing my job and not doing anyone else's job. And as much as I've been able to perfect my job, then I know my worth when it comes to what's next for me. So I can leverage the success that I've had in my job to show you I'm capable of doing your job, but I'm not going to do it for free. And that has been so critical to my personal and professional growth in higher ed, because I know that I can then leverage everything that I've learned and worked on to build on to the next. And, you know, as Renisha said, move on to the next if necessary. I've been blessed enough that being in the positions and the type of positions and the experiences that I've had to create a small set of wealth for my family, being in higher ed. And so when I'm ready to move on, my bread is stacked and it's saved and we can move on, which I don't think a lot of people take advantage of while they're working in higher ed as much as they are. If you're working in higher ed and you live in, save, stack on top of your stacks. We, as a people of color, and more specifically Black people, don't do that. It's like, oh, we're in housing. This is great. Let me pay cash for my car, all of that. And I've seen people do so well financially in creating generational wealth, as Ranisha said, for their children by taking advantage of the opportunities here in higher ed while they're in them. So leverage all of your experience and help use that as you continue on into higher ed if you choose to. And, you know, this thing is rough. You got to be built for tough to be Black and working in higher ed. And higher ed professionals put their mental health, their bodies, everything on the line. If they're not in an urban area, you know, being in a rural area, being in the suburbs is rough. And we do it because we're so passionate about the students being seen and working with them. And I just think that we need to give ourselves some credit and some grace as we move into this school year and into this political climate where we're going to be just as frustrated as our students, and that we find the spaces to do that and then be there for our students as well.
Yeah. Thank you all for this wonderful panel. Round of applause for ourselves. This was fantastic. All of your perspective, and Erica is joining us now.
I am. No, go ahead. You can finish off with your
Oh, I was
thoughts.
gonna just do a recap of the highlights. I'm like, ask questions, make sure you use your transferable skills, and know yourself, know your work. It's hard out here being a Black staff member at the PWI, but we do it because we truly do see the purpose and that there's still a lot of work for us to be done. So, Erica.
Yeah. Thank you all so much. That was amazing. I have it recorded, so I'm going to be more than likely like compiling all of this to share. But just thank y'all for being here. Thank you for sharing everything that you did and coming up as your full selves and giving so much to this panel. Thank you everyone who has come to the event. This is our last session, and you can look forward to more things happening in the future. You can follow black.pwi on Instagram. If you are a staff member, student, or faculty member that is listening and you want to share your story, there is space to share that. Thank you, Jamae, for plugging that in. There is space to share your story as well. Just shoot me an email or a DM, whatever, and I will send you those instructions for that. But just thank y'all. Like, this is something that we need, and it doesn't go unnoticed. Of course, the things that we do for our students, and I really, really, really appreciate it. I appreciate it so much. So just thank you. I
I
hope that
want
y'all
to give
enjoy the rest of
a
your
quick
Saturday.
little shout out to Erica. So
Absolutely.
we gotta go into the guts real quick. So I slid into her DMs on GroupMe and was like, "Your locks are cute. I like those." And we've been friends ever since. But this girl, literally, I really enjoy seeing her transition from what Black at a PWI once was, which was colored at a PWI. And I was like so happy you made the transition because you started to see that dissonance, right? And understand like there is some nuanced experiences and issues that Black staff, faculty, students, people are facing through these higher education institutions. So thank you for creating this platform. Thank you for creating this free event that was not free on your end. Thank you for bringing these people together, you know, to utilize our Saturday to have necessary conversations and put us in spaces with people that I've never met any of y'all before. So now, you know, we know each other at least through a distance, which is how everybody's learning and networking now. So thank you, Erica, for providing this space. Keep doing dope work, and I'm happy to help you in any way you want in the future to make this thrive because we're trying to see you get your coins for this work that you're putting in.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Only the beginning. I'm excited to be a part of this.
Thank you. All right, y'all take care of yourselves. Thank you, Jamae. Yes, keep plugging it on.
Yes.
I appreciate it.